A newly retired doctor from Washington told his wife he needed a solo hike to process his big life change and set off for Mount Rainier. But he never came home, leaving his devoted wife wondering what went wrong. The case went cold, with investigators believing he'd either taken his own life or suffered a tragic accident. But 4 years later, hikers exploring the wilderness downstream stumble upon something shocking trapped in a beaver dam, evidence that would shatter the official theory and prove his wife's instincts had been right all along. Charlotte's hands trembled as she cracked eggs into the pan, the morning sun streaming through her kitchen window, overlooking the distant silhouette of Mount Rainier. 4 years. 4 years since Robert had kissed her goodbye that morning, promised to be back by dinner, and disappeared into the wilderness he loved so much. The eggs sizzled, but her mind was elsewhere, lost in the familiar ache of not knowing. The shrill ring of the phone startled her, causing her to drop the spatula. She glanced at the caller ID, Mount Rainier National Park. Her heart skipped. They hadn't called in over 2 years. Mrs. Charlotte Henley? The ranger's voice was professional, but gentle. "This is Ranger Mike Patterson from Mount Rainier National Park. We need you to come to the station. Some hikers found a backpack in a beaver dam yesterday, and we've traced it through the GPS tracker serial number. It belongs to your husband, Robert." The words hit her like a physical blow. She gripped the counter, her knuckles white. A backpack? After all this time? "Yes, ma'am. Can you come to the ranger station? We have some questions, and the police are already here." Charlotte's mind raced as she drove the familiar route to the ranger station, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. Every turn brought back memories. This was the road they'd driven together countless times. Robert always excited about another adventure, always promising to be careful. She'd trusted his experience, his methodical nature. He'd hiked these trails for 30 years. The ranger station parking lot held 2 police cruisers alongside the usual park vehicles. Charlotte's stomach churned as she walked through the doors, the scent of pine and old wood triggering more memories. Ranger Patterson, a stocky man in his 40s, greeted her with sympathetic eyes. "Mrs. Henley, thank you for coming. This is Detective Morrison from the County Sheriff's Office." Detective Morrison, a tall woman with graying hair pulled back severely, extended her hand. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Please have a seat." They led her to a small conference room where Robert's waterlogged backpack sat on the table, mud-stained and partially torn. Charlotte's breath caught. She recognized it immediately. The gray and blue pack she'd given him for his 60th birthday, complete with the red carabiner he always clipped to the side. "The hikers found it lodged in a beaver dam about 8 miles downstream from Spray Falls," Ranger Patterson explained. "It was partially buried in branches and mud. We were able to trace it through the GPS device's serial number." Detective Morrison opened a folder. "Mrs. Henley, we recovered the memory card from the GPS device. The antenna was damaged. That's why we couldn't ping it during any of our searches over the years. But the memory card retained data from before the damage occurred." Charlotte leaned forward, hope and dread warring in her chest. "What did it show?" "The data indicates your husband went deliberately off trail that day. The last signal came from an area far from any marked path, approximately here." The detective pointed to a topographical map, her finger landing on a remote section of wilderness. "We searched those exact coordinates again yesterday and this morning. Found nothing." "But Robert never went off trail," Charlotte protested. "He was meticulous about safety. He filed his hiking plans, stayed on marked paths. In 30 years of hiking, he never once deviated from his registered route." Detective Morrison's expression remained neutral. "The GPS data is clear. He was miles from where he said he'd be hiking. Given this evidence and the remote location, we're looking at 2 possibilities: suicide or an accident." "Suicide?" Charlotte's voice cracked. "Robert had just retired. We had plans, a cruise to Alaska, visiting our grandchildren in Oregon. He was excited about having more time together." "I understand this is difficult," the detective said, her tone softening slightly. "But after 4 years, with wildlife and natural decomposition, there would be very little trace remaining. We won't be reopening the case. The search of those coordinates yielded nothing, and frankly, there's nothing more we can do." Charlotte felt the walls closing in. "You're giving up? Just like that?" "We're not giving up, Mrs. Henley. We're being realistic. Your husband went off trail to a dangerous area. Whether intentionally or by accident, the outcome is the same. The case will remain closed. Through her tears, Charlotte examined the backpack's contents with Ranger Patterson. Robert's medical license sat in its plastic holder, warped but readable. Robert James Henley, M.D., the photo showing his kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, that gentle smile she missed so desperately. His hiking permit, dated October 15th, 4 years ago, the ink faded but legible. His phone, the screen cracked and filled with murky water, completely destroyed. The unusual thing, Ranger Patterson said quietly, glancing at the detective who had stepped out to take a call, is where we found this. The Beaver Dam is miles downstream from any marked trail. For the pack to end up there, your husband would have had to be somewhere completely off his registered route. The water flow patterns suggest it traveled a significant distance. Charlotte stared at the ruined items, her mind refusing to accept what they implied. Robert always stuck to planned paths. He'd check weather reports 3 times before leaving. He carried backup batteries, emergency supplies. He was methodical about safety. It's what made him such a good doctor. This doesn't make sense. The ranger's expression was sympathetic. Sometimes even experienced hikers make mistakes, Mrs. Henley. Or sometimes people don't want to be found. But Charlotte knew better. Robert would never leave her alone like that. Not after 40 years of marriage. Not after promising they'd spend every day of retirement together. He'd been counting down the days, crossing them off the calendar in his office with red marker, excited as a child before Christmas. As she left the station, clutching a bag with photocopies of the permits and a receipt for the backpack, they were keeping it as evidence, though evidence of what, she couldn't say. Charlotte felt more lost than she had in 4 years. The official verdict was clear. Robert had gone off trail and met with either accident or intention. Case closed. But nothing about this felt like closure. Charlotte sat in her car outside the police station for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles ached. The morning had shifted from routine breakfast to earth-shattering discovery, and she needed to tell someone who knew Robert, who understood what kind of man he was. His former colleagues deserved to know about the backpack. The drive to Cascade Medical Associates took her through downtown, past the coffee shop where Robert used to stop every morning for his black coffee and blueberry muffin. Past the park where they'd celebrated his retirement party, his colleagues surprising him with a cake shaped like Mount Rainier. The memories were everywhere, inescapable. The practice looked different now. The familiar blue awning had been replaced with modern gray, the sign updated with sleek lettering. Charlotte pushed through the glass doors into a waiting room she barely recognized. Gone were the comfortable chairs and warm colors Robert had insisted on. Everything was stark white and chrome now. "Can I help you?" The young receptionist looked up from her computer, no recognition in her eyes. "I'm Charlotte Henley. My husband, Dr. Robert Henley, used to work here. I need to speak with someone about a development?" The receptionist's perfectly shaped eyebrows furrowed. "I'm sorry, I don't recognize that name. I've only been here 18 months. Could I speak with the office manager?" A few minutes later, a harried-looking man in his 30s appeared. "Mrs. Henley, I'm Brandon Chen, the current office manager. I'm afraid I didn't know your husband. The practice was sold 2 years ago, and most of the staff changed over. But Sarah Winters still works here. She was here during Dr. Henley's time." "Sarah's still here?" Charlotte felt a wave of relief. Sarah had been Robert's favorite nurse, competent and caring, someone he'd trusted implicitly. "She's with a patient right now, but she should be free in about 20 minutes. You can wait in the break room if you'd like. It's more private than out here." The break room, at least, hadn't changed much. Charlotte sat at the familiar round table where Robert used to eat lunch, always making sure to include any staff who seemed lonely or stressed. 23 minutes later, Sarah rushed in, her face creasing with concern the moment she saw Charlotte. "Charlotte! Oh my goodness, how are you?" Sarah embraced her warmly, then pulled back to study her face. "Is everything okay? You look upset." Charlotte's words tumbled out. The backpack, the GPS data, the police's conclusions. Sarah listened intently, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "They found it in a beaver dam? After all this time?" Sarah sank into the chair across from Charlotte. I can't believe it. We still miss him so much here. Well, those of us who are left anyway. The police think he went off trail deliberately. They're suggesting suicide or that he got lost. Charlotte's voice caught. But you knew Robert? He would never. Never, Sarah agreed firmly. Charlotte, your husband loved his work, loved his patients. His retirement shocked all of us because he seemed so passionate right up until the end. The patients adored him. Mrs. Yamamoto still asks about him every time she comes in. Charlotte leaned forward. The GPS showed him miles from any marked trail. The police think that proves he wanted to disappear. But Robert was so careful about hiking safety. Sarah's expression shifted subtly, something flickering in her eyes. She glanced toward the door, then back to Charlotte. You know, now that you mention it, Robert did seem different that final week. Different how? Anxious, distracted. He kept checking his phone constantly, which wasn't like him at all. During procedures, he was still completely focused. He'd never compromise patient care. But between appointments, he seemed worried. Charlotte felt her pulse quicken. Did he say anything? I asked him during lunch break on that Wednesday. I remember specifically because he was sitting right where you are now, and his sandwich was untouched. That wasn't like Robert. He always ate heartily. Sarah's voice dropped. I asked if he was okay, if retirement nerves were getting to him. He gave me this forced smile and said he had a lot to wrap up before retirement. That sounds reasonable enough. It wasn't what he said, Charlotte. It was how he said it. His hands were shaking slightly when he picked up his coffee cup. In 15 years of working alongside him through emergency surgeries and difficult diagnoses, I'd never seen Robert's hands shake. The break room suddenly felt smaller, the fluorescent lights too bright. Was there anything else unusual that week? Sarah stood and quietly closed the break room door, then returned to her seat. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. This is probably nothing, and I've never mentioned it to anyone before, but Dr. Harrison's behavior that week was strange. Harrison? Charlotte pictured Robert's boss, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and an easy smile. They'd had dinner together several times over the years, Harrison and his wife Patricia joining them for celebrations and holiday parties. He wouldn't let anyone help with Robert's patient transitions. Usually, when a doctor leaves, the whole team pitches in to transfer files, update records, reassign patients. It's a massive undertaking, but Harrison insisted on handling everything himself. Maybe he wanted to personally ensure continuity of care? Sarah shook her head. That's what I thought at first. But Charlotte, he was here until midnight several nights that week. I know because I forgot my car keys one evening and came back around 11. His office light was still on, and I could see boxes and boxes of files. The strange thing is, he took them all home instead of storing them in our records room. Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. Robert never mentioned Harrison was acting oddly. That's the thing. Harrison was perfectly normal during the day. Cheerful, supportive, throwing Robert that beautiful retirement party. But after hours, Sarah trailed off, shaking her head. I'm probably reading too much into it. Grief makes us look for explanations where there aren't any. You said Harrison took the files home. Were they ever returned? I honestly don't know. By the time I thought to ask, the practice had been sold. Harrison made a fortune on that sale, from what I heard. He opened a new, much larger practice across town. Multi-specialty, state-of-the-art equipment. He's doing very well. Charlotte remembered Harrison's modest practice from before, comfortable, but certainly not lavish. That seems like quite an expansion. He's got investors now, apparently. There was an article in the medical journal about his innovative billing practices and practice management. He's speaking at conferences about maximizing healthcare profits. Sarah's tone carried a hint of disapproval. Very different from the Harrison who used to say patient care came first. The break room door opened and Brandon peered in. Sarah, your 2 o'clock is here. Sarah squeezed Charlotte's hands. I'm so sorry about the backpack. If you need anything at all, please call me. She paused at the door. Charlotte? I know the police have their theories, but I knew Robert. Whatever happened on that mountain, it wasn't because he wanted to leave you. He talked about your retirement plans constantly. The Alaska cruise, teaching your grandson to fish. He was counting down the days. After Sarah left, Charlotte sat alone in the break room for a few more minutes, processing what she'd learned. Robert anxious and distracted. Harrison working late, taking files home. The successful practice sale and expansion. None of it necessarily meant anything, but combined with the GPS data showing Robert far off trail. She thought about all those dinners with Harrison and Patricia, the easy laughter, the war stories from medical school. Harrison had given a beautiful eulogy at Robert's memorial service, speaking about integrity and dedication. He'd held Charlotte while she cried, promised to help any way he could. But now, Sarah's words echoed. Very unusual for a boss to do the grunt work. What had happened in Robert's final week? What had made his steady hands shake? Charlotte gathered her purse and left the break room, nodding goodbye to the receptionist who was already focused on other tasks, other lives moving forward, while hers remained frozen 4 years in the past. But now, for the first time, she wondered if the past held secrets she'd never suspected. Charlotte's hands were dusty and her back ached from bending over boxes, but she couldn't stop searching. The storage unit smelled of mothballs and old paper, afternoon sunlight slanting through the small window to illuminate dancing dust motes. After Sarah's revelations, she needed to look through Robert's things with fresh eyes. She'd kept everything from his home office, every file, every notebook, every receipt. At the time, she'd been too grief-stricken to sort through it properly, just boxing it all up with the vague idea that someday she'd be strong enough to face it. Now, 4 years later, that day had arrived with the force of necessity. The first 3 boxes yielded nothing unusual. Medical journals, patient thank you cards spanning decades, certificates of continuing education. Charlotte smiled through tears at a crayon drawing from a young patient, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. Dr. Robert is the best. In the 4th box, wedged between 2 thick medical journals, she found it, Robert's leather day planner from his final months. Her breath caught. He'd always been old-fashioned about scheduling, preferring pen and paper to digital calendars. She flipped to October, her fingers trembling as she found the week he disappeared. Monday, October 12th. Staff meeting 7 a.m., Johnson surgery 9 a.m., lunch with Charlotte, Tuscany's 1 p.m. Tuesday, October 13th, rounds 6:30 a.m., clinic until 5, retirement party 6 p.m. Wednesday, October 14th. Patterson and Associates, 2 p.m. Evening, review files. Thursday, October 15th. Meeting with Harrison, trail parking lot, 7 a.m. Charlotte stared at the entry, her mind reeling. October 15th. The day Robert disappeared. He told her he was hiking alone, needed time to clear his head about retirement, process the big life change. She remembered his exact words over breakfast. Just need a day with the mountain, Charlotte. You know how it centers me. But here in his careful handwriting was evidence of a planned meeting with Harrison at the trail parking lot at 7 a.m., exactly when Robert had left the house that morning. Why had he lied to her? She flipped back to Wednesday's entry, Patterson and Associates. The name seemed vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. Digging deeper into the box, she found a manila folder labeled October Receipts in Robert's precise hand. Inside, paper-clipped together, were 3 receipts from Patterson and Associates. The letterhead clarified what her memory couldn't. Employment law specialists protecting workers' rights since 1987. Employment law? Robert had never mentioned any work issues requiring legal consultation. The receipt showed consultations on October 7th and 10th, with a 3rd appointment scheduled for October 16th, the day after he disappeared. Charlotte pulled out her phone, grateful the storage unit had decent cell service. The law office answered on the 2nd ring. Patterson and Associates, how may I direct your call? This is Charlotte Henley. My husband, Robert Henley, was a client 4 years ago. I'm calling about some receipts I found. One moment, please. The hold music was generically soothing. Then, Mrs. Henley, I'm transferring you to Miranda Dalton. She handles our records retention. Another wait, then a professional female voice. Mrs. Henley, I see here that doctor. Robert Henley had consultations with Mr. Patterson in October 4 years ago. How can I help you? I'm trying to understand why my husband needed an employment attorney. He never mentioned any issues at work." There was a pause. "I'm limited in what I can share due to attorney-client privilege, even posthumously. However, I can tell you that Dr. Henley's initial inquiry was regarding employment whistleblower protections." Charlotte's mouth went dry. "Whistleblower protections?" "Yes, he specifically asked about protection from retaliation and how to properly document evidence of workplace issues. He was scheduled for a follow-up appointment on October 16th, but never showed. Mr. Patterson tried calling several times, but..." The secretary's voice softened. "I remember when we heard about his disappearance. Mr. Patterson was quite concerned. He said, Dr. Henley sounded very worried during their last conversation, kept asking about whether his family would be protected if he came forward with information." "Protected from what?" "I'm sorry, I can't share any more details, but Mrs. Henley, your husband was very careful in his approach. Whatever he was dealing with, he wanted to handle it properly, through legal channels." Charlotte thanked her and hung up, her mind spinning. Whistleblower protections, evidence documentation, protection from retaliation, and a meeting with Harrison the morning he disappeared, a meeting he'd hidden from her. She loaded the most important boxes into her car, including the day planner and receipts. The drive home felt surreal, her suburban neighborhood looking exactly as it had that morning. Yet everything had changed. Robert hadn't just gone hiking. He'd gone to meet Harrison about something serious enough to require legal counsel. As she turned onto her street, Charlotte noticed the silver Mercedes in her driveway immediately. Dr. Harrison's car. She'd recognize that customized license plate anywhere. HEALR1. Her pulse quickened as she pulled up behind it, seeing Harrison standing by her front door talking animatedly with her neighbor, Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen spotted her first, waving enthusiastically. "Charlotte, I was just telling Dr. Harrison you were out. He's been waiting for you." Harrison turned, his familiar smile in place, but Charlotte noticed something she'd never seen before. A tightness around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders. He was wearing an expensive suit, as always, but his tie was slightly askew, unusual for the typically immaculate man. "Charlotte," he said warmly, approaching her car. "I heard about the backpack. The police contacted me this morning to inform me, asked a few routine questions since I was Robert's employer. I wanted to check on you, see how you're handling this news." Charlotte got out of her car slowly, acutely aware of the boxes visible in her back seat. "That's kind of you, James. It's been a difficult morning." Mrs. Chen, never one to miss an opportunity for gossip, chimed in. "I told Dr. Harrison you'd gone to your storage unit. Spring cleaning, I assumed, though it's October." She laughed at her own observation. Charlotte saw it then, the flash of something in Harrison's eyes when Mrs. Chen mentioned the storage unit. His smile remained, but it faltered for just a moment, like a briefly flickering light bulb. "Storage unit?" Harrison asked casually, but his voice carried an edge Charlotte had never heard before. "Sorting through old things?" "Just some of Robert's belongings," Charlotte replied carefully. "The police returning his backpack made me want to reconnect with his memory." Harrison nodded sympathetically, but his gaze kept darting to her car. Of course. Grief takes us all differently. Find anything interesting? Sometimes going through old things can bring unexpected comfort, or surprises." The question felt loaded, heavy with subtext Charlotte couldn't quite grasp. Mrs. Chen seemed oblivious, nattering on about her own late husband's belongings, but Harrison wasn't listening. His attention was fixed on Charlotte with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Just memories," Charlotte said. "If you'll excuse me, James, it's been a long day." "Of course." Harrison stepped aside, but not before adding, "If you need anything, Charlotte, anything at all, please call. Robert was very important to me. I'd hate for his legacy to be tarnished by misunderstandings." The word hung in the air between them. Misunderstandings. Charlotte forced a smile, nodded, and walked to her front door on unsteady legs. She could feel Harrison's eyes on her back, could sense him cataloging the boxes in her car. Only after she was inside, door locked behind her, did she allow herself to lean against the wall and take a shaking breath. Harrison's appearance, so soon after the police had contacted him, felt like more than coincidence. His interest in what she'd found in storage, the way his mask had slipped when Mrs. Chen mentioned where she'd been, and that parting comment about Robert's legacy and misunderstandings. Charlotte peered through her front window. Harrison was still there, now back at his car but not leaving, cell phone pressed to his ear. His free hand gestured sharply as he spoke, nothing like the calm, collected doctor she'd known for 15 years, or thought she'd known. The day planner sat in her purse, that single entry burning in her mind. Meeting with Harrison, trail parking lot, 7 a.m. What had Robert discovered that required whistleblower protection? What had he been planning to tell Harrison that morning? And why was Harrison so interested in what she might have found in storage? Charlotte had barely settled inside when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Harrison still on her doorstep, his expression rearranged into one of gentle concern. She considered not answering, but something told her that would only make him more persistent. She opened the door partway. "Charlotte, I'm sorry to bother you again," Harrison said, his voice soft and solicitous. "I was about to leave when I realized how abrupt I must have seemed. This news about Robert's backpack has shaken me too. I was wondering, would you like to get coffee? Sometimes it helps to talk with someone who knew him well, who understands what a special man he was." Every instinct screamed caution, but Charlotte also recognized an opportunity. If Harrison was involved in whatever had troubled Robert, perhaps she could learn something. "I suppose a cup of coffee would be nice," she said carefully. "Wonderful. How about Corner Coffee on Main? I remember Robert mentioning it was your favorite spot." "That would be fine. I'll meet you there in 15 minutes. "I'll drive us," Harrison offered quickly. "No sense taking two cars?" "No, I'll drive myself," Charlotte said firmly. "I have errands to run afterward." Something flickered in Harrison's eyes, but he nodded. "Of course. I'll see you there." Charlotte closed the door and immediately pulled out her phone, texting her sister Ellen. "Meeting Dr. Harrison at Corner Coffee on Main. If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, call police." She paused, then added, "Not joking." Ellen's response was immediate. "What's going on? Are you okay?" "We'll explain later. Just please keep an eye on the time." The drive to Corner Coffee took only 10 minutes, but Charlotte used every one to steady her nerves. She parked where her car was visible from the window and chose a table in the busy main area, not the cozy back corner Harrison suggested. "You remembered," Charlotte said as Harrison returned with their drinks, a vanilla latte for her, black coffee for him. "Robert talked about you constantly," Harrison said, settling into his chair. "Vanilla lattes, hiking at sunrise, your grandson's Little League games, he was devoted to you." The words should have been comforting, but something in Harrison's tone made them feel like a probe, testing her defenses. Charlotte took a sip of her latte and waited. "This must be so difficult," Harrison continued. "The not knowing for 4 years, and now this discovery. Have you had time to process it all?" "I'm managing," Charlotte said carefully. Harrison leaned forward, his expression sympathetic. "Going through Robert's things must be emotional. All those memories stored away. Did you find much in storage? Sometimes people keep things they never mention to their spouses. Work documents, for instance." There it was. Charlotte kept her face neutral. Mostly medical journals and patient thank you cards. Robert saved every drawing a child ever gave him. "How like him," Harrison smiled, but his fingers had started a rhythmic tap against the table. "No work files?" He was always so meticulous about documentation. I'd imagine he kept copies of important paperwork. "Just the usual," Charlotte said vaguely. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason. It's just that when the police called this morning, they asked if Robert had taken any patient files home. HIPAA violations, you understand. I assured them Robert would never do such a thing, but I wanted to make sure, for his reputation's sake." Charlotte noticed the slight sheen of perspiration on Harrison's forehead, despite the coffee shop's cool temperature. "The police asked about patient files?" "Standard questions, I'm sure." Harrison's drumming fingers picked up pace. "They also asked about his state of mind those final weeks. I told them what I observed, of course. Did you happen to find any personal writings, journals? Sometimes people contemplating major life changes. Write things down." "Robert wasn't much of a journal keeper," Charlotte said, watching Harrison's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "No? How about appointment books? He always carried that leather planner. Harrison's attempt at casual interest was failing. His voice had developed an edge. Charlotte made a decision. Actually, I did find his day planner. Harrison's fingers stopped drumming. Oh? Yes, it was interesting looking at his final week. All those appointments wrapping up his practice. She paused, watching Harrison's face carefully. There was an entry on October 15th that confused me. October 15th? Harrison's voice was steady, but his knuckles had whitened where he gripped his coffee cup. He'd written, "Meeting with Harrison, trail parking lot 7 a.m." But he told me he was hiking alone that morning. The transformation in Harrison's face was instant and complete. The mask of concern shattered, replaced by something Charlotte had never seen before, calculation mixed with barely controlled panic. "Oh, that," Harrison said, his laugh forced and hollow. Poor Robert. He was so confused that morning. Actually, he called me around 6:30, sounding agitated. He was worried about his mental state, said retirement was hitting him harder than expected. I tried to talk him out of hiking, suggested we meet to discuss his concerns, but he insisted he needed time alone on the mountain. Charlotte stared at him, this man she'd known for 15 years, watching him construct lies as easily as breathing. "Robert called you?" "Yes, very early. Patricia can confirm. The phone woke us both. He sounded unwell, talking about pressure, about things he couldn't handle. I offered to meet him to help, but he became almost paranoid, said he needed to think." Harrison leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Charlotte, I didn't want to burden you with this, but Robert had been showing signs of depression for weeks. The retirement transition was devastating for him." "Depression?" Charlotte heard her own voice, sharp with disbelief. Robert was excited about retirement. He had plans, trips mapped out. "Sometimes people hide their true feelings, even from those closest to them," Harrison interrupted smoothly. As a physician, he would have known how to mask the symptoms. That confusion about our meeting, writing it down when it was just a phone call, that's typical of someone under severe stress. But Charlotte knew better. She'd seen that day planner entry. Robert's handwriting was firm, precise, exactly as it always was. No confusion, no trembling letters of a man in distress. And Robert had never lied to her, not once in 40 years. If he'd spoken to Harrison that morning, he would have mentioned it. "I should go," Charlotte said, standing abruptly. Harrison stood, too quickly, his coffee cup rattling against the saucer. "Charlotte, wait. If you found anything else, any documents that might be misinterpreted, I hope you'll let me know, for Robert's sake." His reputation dash. "Robert's reputation doesn't need protecting," Charlotte said coldly. "Excuse me?" She walked out steadily, but she could feel Harrison's eyes boring into her back. In her peripheral vision, she caught sight of his reflection in the window, standing frozen by their table, his coffee cup trembling visibly in his hand. The man who had delivered Robert's eulogy, who had praised his integrity and dedication, who had promised to help her through her grief. That man was gone. In his place stood someone Charlotte didn't recognize, someone whose carefully constructed story about Robert's mental state was so obviously false it made her stomach turn. Robert hadn't been depressed. He hadn't been confused. He'd had an appointment with Harrison that morning, and Harrison was desperate to hide why. Charlotte's hand shook as she pushed through the restroom door. The normalcy of the coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of customers, felt surreal against the hammering of her heart. She locked herself in the farthest stall and pulled out her phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? Charlotte kept her voice to a whisper. I'm at Corner Coffee on Main Street. I'm with someone who I believe may be dangerous. Please send someone. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? I don't know, maybe. His name is Dr. James Harrison. He's asking questions about my deceased husband, and he's acting erratically. I'm scared. We'll send a unit to check on you. Can you safely stay where you are? I have to go back out there, or he'll get suspicious. Please hurry. Charlotte ended the call and took several deep breaths, trying to compose herself. She splashed cold water on her face, practiced a neutral expression in the mirror, and walked back out with what she hoped looked like calm. The sight that greeted her made her stomach drop. Harrison had moved from his side of the table to her side of the booth, blocking her exit. His coffee sat abandoned across the table. "There you are," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. I was starting to worry. Charlotte forced herself to slide into the booth, pressed against the wall. "Sorry, I'm just feeling a bit overwhelmed by everything today." "Understandable." Harrison's tone had shifted, the false sympathy replaced by something harder. "You know, I drove past your house this morning on my way to the hospital. Early, around 6. Noticed you had boxes out by the curb. Spring cleaning in October?" Charlotte's mouth went dry. There had been no boxes by her curb. Don't lie to me, Charlotte." The words came out sharp, cutting through the coffee shop ambiance. "I saw you loading boxes into your car at the storage unit. Mrs. Chen was quite chatty about your activities." "I should go," Charlotte said, trying to slide past him. Harrison didn't budge. "What did you find?" "Nothing. Just memories, like I said." Charlotte's voice came out higher than intended. "Robert kept copies of everything, didn't he? Always so thorough, so self-righteous." The last words came out as a hiss. Charlotte pushed harder against him. "I need to leave. My sister is expecting me." For a moment, Harrison didn't move. Then slowly, he stood. "Of course. Let me walk you to your car." It wasn't a request. Harrison's hand was on her elbow, his grip firm as he guided her toward the exit. Charlotte scanned the coffee shop desperately, hoping to catch someone's eye, but everyone was absorbed in their own conversations, their own lives. The October air hit her face as they stepped outside, and with it came a new level of fear. The parking lot was nearly empty, her car parked in the far corner where she'd thought it would be visible from the window. Now that distance felt like miles. "Where are they?" Harrison's voice had lost all pretense of friendliness. "Where are what?" His grip tightened painfully. "The documents, the files, whatever Robert kept. I know he made copies." "I don't know what you're talking about." Harrison spun her around, slamming her back against her car. "Don't play stupid with me. Robert was going to ruin everything with his self-righteous attitude. 40 years of building a practice, creating jobs, helping people, and he wanted to destroy it all over some numbers on a spreadsheet." "James, you're hurting me." "Where are the files?" He shook her, his face inches from hers. "Did you give them to the police? The FBI? Who else knows?" Charlotte tried to pull away, but Harrison was stronger than his silver hair suggested. "Let go of me. People saw us leave together. If anything happens to me..." That's when she saw the gun. Harrison pulled it from inside his jacket in one smooth motion, pressing it against her ribs. The metal was cold through her thin sweater. "Get in my car." "James, please. Get in the car." He shoved her toward his Mercedes, the gun hidden between their bodies, but unmistakably there. "Move." Charlotte's legs felt like water. "You don't have to do this. Whatever happened with Robert..." "Shut up." Harrison opened the passenger door, using his body to shield the gun from any potential witnesses. "Get in, or I'll shoot you right here." Charlotte looked around desperately. The coffee shop windows reflected the afternoon sun, impossible to see through. A woman walked past on the sidewalk, absorbed in her phone. No one was coming to help. "Please," she whispered as Harrison shoved her into the seat. "I have grandchildren." "You should have thought of that before you started digging." Harrison slammed the door and moved quickly to the driver's side, the gun now pointed at her across the center console. "Hands where I can see them." Charlotte placed her shaking hands on her lap as Harrison started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. He drove with one hand, the gun steady in the other. "You should have kept out of this," he said, his voice eerily calm now. "Should have just accepted that Robert killed himself like everyone else did. 4 years, Charlotte, 4 years of peace, and you had to ruin it." "You killed him?" The words came out as a whisper, but Harrison heard them. Robert killed himself the moment he decided to be a hero. "Do you know how many people depended on my practice? Not just employees, their families, their children's college funds, their mortgages. One sanctimonious doctor was going to ruin the lives of dozens of people." Charlotte began to cry, tears streaming down her face as Harrison drove faster, leaving the commercial district behind. The familiar streets gave way to suburban neighborhoods, then to the rural roads that led toward Mount Rainier. "He found discrepancies, didn't he?" Charlotte said through her tears. "In the billing?" Harrison's laugh was bitter. Discrepancies. Such a clinical word for it. Robert couldn't understand that sometimes you have to work the system to keep a practice afloat. Insurance companies deny legitimate claims while their executives get rich. I was just leveling the playing field. By committing fraud? By surviving. Harrison's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. But St. Robert couldn't see the gray areas. Everything was black and white to him. He was going to report me, destroy everything I'd built, send me to prison. For what? For making sure my people could feed their families? The trees grew denser as they drove, the afternoon sun filtering through the canopy. Charlotte recognized the area. This was the road to the Sunrise Visitor Center, the same route Robert would have taken that October morning. "Where are you taking me?" "Where do you think?" Harrison turned onto a dirt road, the Mercedes bumping over roots and rocks. "Your husband liked to hike, thought the mountain gave him clarity. Let's see if it does the same for you." 20 minutes of terrifying silence passed, broken only by Charlotte's quiet prayers and the sound of gravel under the tires. Finally, Harrison pulled into a small clearing and shut off the engine. "Get out!" Charlotte's legs nearly gave out as she stood. The forest was quiet, peaceful even, birds calling in the distance. It seemed impossible that she was about to die in such a beautiful place. "Walk?" Harrison gestured with the gun toward a narrow trail leading into the trees. "We're going to take a little hike, just like Robert did." "They'll find you," Charlotte said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "The police know I was with you. My sister knows." "Your sister knows you had coffee with an old friend. The police will find your car at the coffee shop and assume you went for a walk to clear your head. Grief does strange things to people. Sometimes they follow their loved ones." He pushed her forward onto the trail, the gun pressed against her back. The trees closed in around them, the afternoon light growing dimmer under the canopy. "Move," Harrison commanded. "We have some walking to do." The forest floor was uneven, covered in fallen branches and exposed roots that caught at Charlotte's feet. Harrison pushed her forward relentlessly, the gun barrel a constant pressure against her spine. Her breathing came in short gasps, both from exertion and fear. "Keep moving," Harrison commanded, his own breathing heavy. "Don't even think about running. You wouldn't make it 5 feet." Charlotte stumbled over a thick root, catching herself against a moss-covered tree. The bark was rough under her palms, real and solid in a way that made this nightmare feel impossibly concrete. How many times had Robert touched these same trees, walked these same paths? They'd gone maybe 50 yards into the woods when the first siren wailed in the distance. Harrison froze, his head whipping around like a startled deer. "No," he muttered. "No, no, no." More sirens joined the first, growing louder, closer. Charlotte felt a surge of hope that died quickly when Harrison's hand clamped around her arm. "You called them." His voice was flat, disbelieving. "At the coffee shop, you called the police." The sirens were screaming now, multiple vehicles from the sound of it. Through the trees, Charlotte could see flashes of red and blue lights. "Damn it!" Harrison yanked her roughly against him, spinning her around to face the direction they'd come. His arm went around her neck, the gun pressing against her temple. This wasn't supposed to happen. The sounds of car doors slamming echoed through the forest, voices shouting commands, the rustle of movement through undergrowth. They were surrounding the area. "Dr. Harrison?" A familiar voice boomed through a megaphone. Detective Morrison from that morning. "This is the police. We have the area surrounded. Let Mrs. Henley go and come out with your hands visible." Harrison backed up against a large Douglas fir, using its trunk as cover while keeping Charlotte firmly in front of him. She could feel him trembling against her back, his arm tightening around her throat. "Back off!" he shouted. "Everyone back off or I'll kill her. I swear I'll do it." "Dr. Harrison, no one needs to get hurt here." Detective Morrison's amplified voice carried clearly through the trees. "Let's talk about this. Let Charlotte go, and we can work something out." "There's nothing to work out," Harrison's voice cracked. "You don't understand. Robert was going to destroy everything I built." Charlotte could see officers taking positions behind trees, weapons drawn but pointed down. They were being careful, professional. A younger officer in tactical gear was moving slowly closer from the left, using the undergrowth as cover. "Stay back!" Harrison swung the gun toward the movement, then back to Charlotte's head. "I mean it! Everyone stay where you are!" The standoff stretched out, minutes feeling like hours. Sweat dripped from Harrison's face onto Charlotte's neck. She could feel his whole body shaking now, the gun wavering against her temple. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he kept muttering. "Robert should have just taken the money. I offered him money. Did you know that? Enough to travel, enjoy retirement. But no, he had to be noble, had to be righteous." "Dr. Harrison," a new voice called out, male, calm, professional. "I'm Officer David Chen, a negotiator. Can we talk? Help me understand what happened." "What happened?" Harrison laughed bitterly. "What happened is that one sanctimonious doctor decided he was judge and jury. 15 years of friendship meant nothing to him. Nothing." Charlotte felt Harrison's grip shifting, his agitation growing. The gun moved from her temple to wave at the police, then back again. His movements were becoming erratic, unpredictable. "He had evidence," Harrison continued, almost rambling now. "Copies of everything, bills, records, bank statements, so careful, so thorough, just like always. Said he was going to the FBI that afternoon if I didn't turn myself in." Officer Chen took a slow step forward, hands visible and empty. "Let's talk about this, Doctor. I'm sure there's—" "Don't come any closer." Harrison's voice rose to a near scream. Panic had taken over completely now. Charlotte could feel his heart hammering against her back, his breathing ragged. Chen took another small step. It was too much. Harrison made a sound somewhere between a sob and a snarl, raising the gun and bringing it down hard against the side of Charlotte's head. Pain exploded through her skull, white lights dancing across her vision. She cried out, her knees buckling, and suddenly she was falling. The moment Charlotte dropped, Harrison's human shield was gone. He looked down at her crumpled form, then at the circle of officers closing in, and made a desperate decision. He turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth deeper into the forest. He made it maybe 20 feet. 2 officers in tactical gear burst from concealment, hitting Harrison from both sides. They went down in a tangle of limbs, Harrison fighting wildly but hopelessly outmatched. Within seconds, they had him face down in the pine needles, arms wrenched behind his back. "Stop resisting," one officer commanded as they cuffed him. But Harrison kept struggling, kept ranting. "You don't understand. Robert destroyed everything. My practice, my reputation, my life. He destroyed it all with his righteousness. 40 years of work, gone because one man couldn't mind his own business." Charlotte held her hand to her bleeding head, the world spinning as EMTs rushed to her. She could hear Harrison still shouting as they hauled him to his feet, pine needles and dirt clinging to his expensive suit. "He wouldn't listen," Harrison screamed. "I begged him, offered him money, offered him anything, but he had to be the hero, had to save the world. Well, where did it get him? Where did it get him?" The EMTs were gentle, professional, checking Charlotte's pupils and pressing gauze to the gash on her scalp. "You're going to be okay," one assured her. "Just a nasty cut. We'll get you checked out at the hospital." Through her tears and pain, Charlotte watched as they dragged Harrison away, still ranting about Robert, about money, about everything being destroyed. The distinguished doctor she'd known for 15 years was gone, replaced by this wild-eyed stranger covered in forest debris, spitting accusations at a dead man. Detective Morrison knelt beside her as the EMTs worked. "You did good, Mrs. Henley. That 911 call saved your life." Charlotte nodded weakly, then winced at the pain it caused. Around them, the forest was full of activity. Officers, radios crackling, evidence being marked. The peaceful trail had become a crime scene. But Charlotte was alive. Unlike Robert, she would walk out of these woods. The thought brought fresh tears, but also a grim satisfaction. Harrison had failed. Whatever secrets Robert had died protecting, Harrison's attempts to bury them had failed. Justice, delayed by 4 years, was finally coming. The fluorescent lights in the police station interview room made Charlotte's headache worse, but she refused to go to the hospital until she'd given her statement. A butterfly bandage held the cut on her head closed, the EMTs assuring her it wouldn't need stitches. Detective Morrison sat across from her, a digital recorder between them, while a younger officer took notes. "Take your time, Mrs. Henley," Morrison said gently. "Start wherever you're comfortable." Charlotte began with the morning's discovery of the backpack, moved through Sarah's revelations at the medical practice, the storage unit findings, and finally, Harrison's increasingly erratic behavior. Her voice shook when she described the gun, the drive into the forest, the certainty that she was about to die where Robert had died. "He kept saying Robert should have taken the money," Charlotte said. "That Robert was going to destroy everything." Morrison nodded. "Dr. Harrison is in interrogation room 2. Would you like to take a break?" I need to know what happened to my husband." A knock on the door interrupted them. Another detective leaned in, whispered something to Morrison that made her eyebrows rise. "Mrs. Henley," Morrison said carefully, "Harrison's story is falling apart quickly. Faced with the day planner evidence and your statement, he's talking, a lot." Charlotte's hands clenched in her lap. "What is he saying?" "I'll get the latest update. Officer Williams will stay with you." Morrison left, returning 15 minutes later with a grim expression and a thick folder. "Harrison broke down completely," she said, sitting back down. "He's confessed to Robert's murder." The word hit Charlotte like a physical blow. Murder. Not missing, not suicide, not accident. Murder. Morrison opened the folder. According to Harrison, he and 2 accomplices, men who worked at his practice, doing what he calls off-the-books jobs, met Robert at the trailhead that morning. They told Robert they wanted to discuss a resolution to their, quote, misunderstanding, said they could work things out privately. Robert believed them. Apparently he was wary but willing to listen. Harrison convinced him they just needed to talk away from potential eavesdroppers. They followed him up the trail for about an hour, getting him far from any witnesses. Charlotte closed her eyes, picturing Robert hiking with those men, probably still hoping for a peaceful resolution. He'd always believed in people's better nature. "They stopped at a remote viewpoint," Morrison continued. "Harrison made one last attempt to buy Robert's silence. When Robert refused and said he was going to the FBI that very afternoon, Harrison claims one of his accomplices pushed Robert. But given Harrison's pattern of lies, we suspect he gave the order or did it himself." "How?" The word came out as a whisper. "It was a 200-foot drop onto rocks. Death would have been instantaneous." Morrison's voice softened. "He wouldn't have suffered, Mrs. Henley." Charlotte nodded, unable to speak. Morrison gave her a moment before continuing. "Harrison and his accomplices made it look like Robert had gone off trail on his own. They damaged the GPS device to prevent tracking, threw the backpack in the river. They thought it would never be found." "But why?" Charlotte finally managed. "What was worth killing for?" Morrison pulled out another document. "This is where it gets complicated. Harrison has admitted to extensive insurance fraud over the past 15 years. He was billing for procedures never performed, sometimes on patients who had died months earlier. The electronic records were altered to show treatments that never happened." "Sarah mentioned he wouldn't let anyone help with the patient transitions," Charlotte said slowly. "He took all the files home." He was covering his tracks. But that's not all. Morrison's expression darkened. Harrison was also involved in illegal organ trafficking. He was accepting black market money for organ transplants, using his legitimate practice as a front. He had connections in major cities, a whole network of corruption. Charlotte felt sick. The man who'd delivered Robert's eulogy, who'd praised his integrity, had been running a criminal enterprise from behind his healer's facade. "Robert discovered discrepancies during his final weeks," Morrison explained. "Harrison got sloppy, or maybe Robert was just that thorough. Financial records that didn't add up, patient files that didn't match billing, unusual deposits. Robert started investigating quietly, gathering evidence." "The attorney," Charlotte said suddenly. "He was consulting about whistleblower protections." "He was building a case. Harrison found out, he won't say how, and tried to buy him off. When that failed, he tried threats. Robert didn't back down." An officer knocked and entered, speaking quietly to Morrison. Charlotte watched the detective's face change, a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Mrs. Henley, Morrison said gently. Based on Harrison's confession about the exact location, we sent a helicopter to the cliff area. They found remains. Charlotte's vision blurred with tears. 4 years of not knowing, and now. The remains are lodged between rocks in a ravine. Recovery teams are working to bring him home. I need to prepare you. After 4 years of exposure to weather and wildlife, identification will require DNA testing, and much is missing. Charlotte nodded, tears flowing freely now. But I can bury him. I can give him a proper funeral. Yes, Morrison said softly. You can? Charlotte wiped her eyes. What about Harrison's accomplices? He's naming names, trying to get a deal. 2 men who worked maintenance at his practice did his dirty work. We have units picking them up now. The FBI is getting involved, given the interstate nature of the organ trafficking. This is big, Mrs. Henley. Your husband uncovered something that goes beyond just one corrupt doctor. Charlotte thought about Robert's final week, the shaking hands Sarah had noticed, the secret attorney visits, the weight of knowledge he'd carried alone. He'd known how dangerous Harrison was, but felt morally obligated to stop him. He'd tried to protect her by keeping her ignorant of the danger. He knew they might kill him, Charlotte said quietly. That's why he didn't tell me about the meeting. He was protecting me. Your husband was a brave man, Morrison said. He could have taken the money, looked the other way. Instead, he chose to do the right thing. He always did, Charlotte whispered. It's who he was. Later, as Charlotte signed her statement, she thought about the 2 men she'd lost that day. The husband who'd died 4 years ago trying to stop a monster, and the illusion of the friend she thought she'd known. Harrison had sat at their dinner table, laughed at Robert's jokes, played the role of respected physician while running a criminal empire that destroyed lives. But Robert had seen through the mask, and even knowing the cost might be his life, he'd stood up to corruption. He'd gathered evidence, consulted lawyers, prepared to bring Harrison down properly, legally. He'd died on the mountain he loved, pushed by men he'd trusted, but he'd died with his integrity intact. Charlotte left the police station as the sun was setting, painting Mount Rainier in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere on that mountain, recovery teams were bringing Robert home. The not knowing was over. The questions were answered. Her tears came fresh, but mixed with the grief was pride. Robert had died a hero, even if no one but her would ever know it. He'd sacrificed himself to stop an evil that had festered behind a healer's mask. She drove home slowly, already planning the funeral Robert deserved. A proper burial, with full honors, with the truth of his courage finally known. Harrison would face justice. His accomplices would be caught. The network would be dismantled. And Robert would finally rest in peace, his final battle won.